Welcome to Euthania Travels, your ultimate destination for exploring the most extraordinary places around the globe. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us on a wild adventure through Russia's most remote lands. In today's documentary, we're taking you on a journey to a mysterious corner of Russia, where things are done a little differently. You might have heard of remote villages where people live off the land, but have you ever heard of a place where husbands allow their wives to serve strangers all night long? Sounds crazy, right? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the wild world of Russia's most remote and unusual customs. Let's start by setting the scene. We're talking about a region so remote that the nearest city is a 12-hour drive away on unpaved roads. The people who live here are tough, resilient, and deeply connected to their traditions. But what sets this place apart is a custom that might seem bizarre to outsiders: the practice of husbands allowing their wives to serve strangers all night long. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let's take a closer look at this unusual tradition. In this community, hospitality is held in high regard, and it's considered an honor to serve guests with the utmost care and attention. Wives take pride in their roles as hostesses, and husbands trust their spouses to fulfill this duty with dignity and respect. As you can imagine, this tradition has sparked plenty of controversy over the years. Critics argue that it reinforces gender stereotypes and can put women in vulnerable positions. Supporters, on the other hand, claim that it's a unique cultural practice that should be respected and preserved. Throughout our documentary, we'll explore both sides of this debate and bring you face to face with the people who live by this custom every day. We'll hear from wives, husbands, and community leaders about their perspectives on this controversial tradition, and we'll examine its impact on the lives of those who call this remote land home. So get ready for a journey like no other, as we delve into the heart of Russia's most remote and unusual community. Don't forget to subscribe to Euthania Travels for more incredible adventures, and leave us a comment to let us know what you think about this bizarre tradition. As we begin our journey into the heart of this remote Russian community, let's take a moment to appreciate the breathtaking landscapes that surround us. Majestic forests, rugged mountains, and crystal-clear rivers stretch as far as the eye can see. It's a truly wild and untamed corner of the world, where nature reigns supreme. But don't be fooled by the tranquil beauty of this place. Life here is tough, and the people who call it home have learned to adapt to the harsh realities of their environment. Winters are long and frigid, with temperatures often dipping well below freezing. Summers are brief and intense, bringing swarms of mosquitoes and other pests. It's against this backdrop that the unusual tradition of wives serving strangers takes place. But what does this custom look like in practice? Well, when guests arrive in the village, they're welcomed with open arms. Husbands invite the visitors into their homes and introduce their wives, who then take over as hostesses. The women serve food and drinks, entertain guests with stories and songs, and ensure that everyone feels at home. As the night wears on, it's not uncommon for wives to continue serving the guests until the early hours of the morning. Husbands trust their spouses to fulfill this role with dignity and grace, and the women take pride in their ability to provide exceptional hospitality. Of course, this tradition raises plenty of questions about gender roles and power dynamics. Within the community, is it truly fair for wives to bear the burden of serving guests all night long? Does this custom perpetuate harmful stereotypes about women's responsibilities? And what impact does it have on the relationships between husbands and wives? These are just a few of the issues we'll explore as we continue our journey through this remote and fascinating corner of Russia. So stay tuned and keep those comments coming. We want to hear your thoughts on this unusual tradition. One of the most striking aspects of this tradition is the sense of pride that wives take in their roles as hostesses. Far from feeling oppressed or exploited, many women see their ability to serve guests as a mark of honor and a testament to their skills as homemakers. In fact, some wives even compete with one another to see who can provide the best hospitality. They'll go to great lengths to prepare elaborate meals, decorate their homes, and ensure that every guest feels welcome and comfortable. It's not uncommon for women to stay up all night, tending to the guests' every need with a smile and a warm-hearted laugh. Of course, not everyone in the community shares this enthusiasm for the tradition. Some younger women, in particular, are beginning to question the status quo and push for change. They argue that it's time for the community to reevaluate its customs and embrace more modern attitudes toward gender roles. This tension between tradition and progress is a common theme in many remote communities around the world. As the outside world encroaches on these isolated pockets of culture, it's natural for younger generations to question the old ways and seek new paths forward. But change doesn't come easily in a place like this. For many villagers, the tradition of wives serving strangers is a deeply ingrained part of their identity and a symbol of their connection to the past. Giving it up would mean sacrificing a piece of their heritage, a prospect that fills some with sadness and anxiety. As we continue our journey through this remote Russian community, we'll delve deeper into the complex emotions and debates surrounding this unusual custom. We'll speak with women who are challenging the status quo, as well as those who are fighting to preserve it. And we'll explore the larger questions about tradition, progress, and the ever-shifting nature of cultural identity. So keep watching and let us know what you think. We want to hear your thoughts on this fascinating and complex issue. As we delve deeper into the tradition of wives serving strangers, it's important to acknowledge the historical and cultural context in which this custom developed. For centuries, hospitality has been a cornerstone of Russian culture, particularly in rural communities. In a harsh and unforgiving environment, welcoming travelers with open arms was seen as a way to build relationships, foster trust, and promote cooperation between different groups of people. In this context, the role of women as hostesses took on a special significance. As the primary caretakers of the home and family, women were seen as embodying the values of warmth, generosity, and nurturing that were essential to hospitality. Serving guests was a way for women to demonstrate their skill and dedication as homemakers, and to earn respect within their community. Over time, this tradition became formalized and codified, with certain expectations and norms emerging around how wives should serve guests. For example, it was customary for women to wear traditional clothing and serve homemade food and drinks, often incorporating ingredients that were harvested or foraged from the surrounding countryside. While the specific customs and practices surrounding hospitality have evolved over the years, the underlying values of generosity and openness have remained constant. Of course, not all aspects of this tradition are rooted in a desire for hospitality. There are also practical considerations that come into play. For example, in a remote community where travel is difficult and resources are scarce, providing food and shelter for guests can be a valuable way to build social capital and strengthen relationships with neighboring communities. By serving guests all night long, wives can create a sense of obligation that may be repaid in the future, when their own families are in need of assistance. There are also gender dynamics at play that help to explain the persistence of this tradition. In many patriarchal societies, women's roles are often restricted to the domestic sphere, with men taking on the primary responsibility for public life and decision-making. In this context, serving guests can be seen as a way for women to assert their agency and demonstrate their value within the community. By excelling in their role as hostesses, women can gain a measure of power and influence, even within a system that often undervalues their contributions. Of course, this is not to suggest that women in these communities are necessarily happy with the status quo. Many women feel constrained by the expectations placed upon them, and would prefer to have more freedom and autonomy in their lives. As we've seen, the tradition of wives serving strangers is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, with roots in both cultural tradition and practical necessity. But what does the future hold for this custom? There are some indications that change may be on the horizon. As we mentioned earlier, younger women in the community are beginning to question the status quo and push for greater gender equality. They're demanding more opportunities for education, career advancement, and political participation, and they're challenging the notion that women's roles should be limited to the domestic sphere. At the same time, There are some within the community who are pushing back against these efforts, arguing that change is not always progress. They worry that abandoning traditional customs like the serving of strangers will lead to a loss of cultural identity and a breakdown of social cohesion. Ultimately, the future of this tradition will depend on a delicate balancing act between tradition and progress, between the desire for stability and the need for change. It's a dynamic that plays out in communities around the world, as people struggle to reconcile their cultural heritage with the demands of a rapidly changing world. What do you think? Do you believe that this tradition is worth preserving, or is it time for it to evolve? As we reflect on the complex issues surrounding the tradition of wives serving strangers, it's important to consider the broader implications of this custom for women's rights and gender equality. On the one hand, some argue that the tradition is inherently patriarchal and oppressive, reinforcing harmful stereotypes about women's roles and limiting their opportunities for personal and professional growth. From this perspective, the custom should be abandoned in favor of more progressive and egalitarian practices. On the other hand, others argue that the tradition has value as a cultural practice and should be preserved as a part of the community's heritage. From this perspective, efforts to change the custom should be approached with sensitivity and respect for the cultural context in which it developed. Ultimately, the debate over this tradition highlights the complex and multifaceted nature of gender relations in society. It's a reminder that progress toward gender equality requires not only legal and political changes, but also shifts in cultural attitudes and practices. It's certainly interesting to consider the broader implications of cultural traditions like this one, and how they relate to larger issues of gender equality and women's rights. However, it's also important to recognize the complexity and nuance of these issues, and to approach them with an open mind and a willingness to listen to different perspectives. Every community has its own unique history, values, and challenges, and it's not always easy to find a simple solution that works for everyone. Do you think that there's a way to preserve cultural heritage while also promoting gender equality and women's rights? What do you think are some of the key factors that need to be taken into account when navigating these types of issues?